I got to play the first chapter of Ravenswatch early with a couple of my friends who were playing 3-player co-op, and I was kind of blown away by it. It is so much fun. It comes out tomorrow, Thursday, on Steam Early Access, and I think it's well worth a play. So for anyone who doesn't know, Ravenswatch is a 4-player co-op roguelite. It's made by the people who made Curse of the Dead Gods. There was a super good roguelite before, and Ravenswatch has this kind of twist that you're playing as characters from folklore. It's also kind of a twist that it's a co-op roguelite, like that's something that's surprisingly rare, especially considering how well it works in this game. The basic gist is that you're going to go in, either solo or with your friends, into a map. Like the first chapter is available, it's this kind of woods area. And then you've got a bit of in-game time, about 24 minutes before you're going to get teleported to the boss and you're going to have to fight it and try and kill it. And the boss is super hard, it has loads of health. In this case, it's a massive like Cthulhu creature, lots of tentacles coming up out of the ground. You can fight the tentacles to stun the main boss, you can do more damage to it, or you can just chip away at its health while trying to avoid all the attacks. It's up to you. But in that time, you've got to prepare for that final battle. Obviously, it being a roguelite, you can get stronger. So you can go around, try and find chests to get better items. You can level up to level 5, at which point you get like an ultimate ability. You can choose different power-ups, so sometimes you'll get options like, do you want to buff this particular ability, or do you want to make it so you have passive health regeneration, or something like that. You can even go on little quests, you can fight enemies that will make the bosses weaker at the end of it. You've got loads of different choices about how you want to get more powerful, and then you kind of put it to the test when you fight that boss. Obviously, when the full game comes out, you're going to have more chapters after this. So you're going to complete this chapter, fight this boss, and then go into the next chapter and probably fight an even harder boss and fight in a different arena. But at the moment, at Early Access launch, there's just this one area. But once you beat that boss, you'll unlock more characters to play as, and then you'll also unlock harder difficulties. It'll do things like having some modified enemies that have extra abilities, or it will give you less respawns and things like that. The characters are really the highlight of Ravenswatch. They're the thing that makes it super unique and super interesting. So like I said, they're based on folklore, but it's kind of a weird mix of folklore. So you've got one character that's basically Little Red Riding Hood, but can also turn into a werewolf. And because there's a day-night cycle in the game, you have a handful of days before the boss is going to come, and each day is about 4 or 5 minutes long. Whenever it's daytime, you're playing as Little Red Riding Hood, and she's like a rogue and can stab stuff. And then when it gets to nighttime, you turn into a werewolf, where you can get a little bit of health back, and you just sort of use your claws to rip through people. There's also a character that's basically Elsa from Frozen and can like skate around, like she's got ice skates on, and can freeze people and blow them up. There's Beowulf, who's like a barbarian but also has a pet dragon on his shoulder that can set people on fire. There's a Pied Piper that can hit enemies with musical notes and also summon an army of rats to go send them to attack enemies. There's Aladdin, who uses dual blades and is kind of somersaulting all over the place. It's very, very cool. Probably my favourite character. And also has a genie that he can only use 3 times but has incredibly powerful effects from the spells that he can cast. That's awesome. I really like Aladdin. And then finally there's basically the Little Mermaid. And Little Mermaid's super weird, kind of can't move while she's summoning this wisp and singing to it while it flies around and attacks everything. I found her probably the most difficult one to use. But the most interesting thing about these characters is that all of them play completely differently. Like, it changes the way you interact with the game, it changes the way you think about fights, and I've barely scratched the surface of all of the different upgrades you can get. There's also loads of really interesting synergies between the characters. So like a couple of the characters can freeze enemies, and then the Ice Queen character can shatter all of them, or get bonus critical damage when there's any chilled enemies nearby. Or a couple of the characters can set enemies on fire, and then the Beowulf character can blow up those enemies when he kills them and spread the fire around to more. There's really interesting ways you can sort of build up your team. You're not allowed to have more than one player as a single character, so you can't have like 20 rats behind each Pied Piper, so you've got an army of 60 rats attacking or anything like that. Instead, you all need to think about how the different characters you play will complement each other. I thought it was super fun. In terms of the combat, it's pretty similar to other roguelites you might have played. You know, you have a dodge button, you also have a bunch of different abilities that can be added to or modified using different power-ups, and then all of the different enemies have different styles of attacks, and that kind of gives you different things to think about. So some of them might be super annoying because if you kill them they explode, other ones might be able to do long range attacks that home in on you, others might cause big area of effect things, so you've got to kind of get out of that area of effect before it attacks you. It makes each fight super interesting because the different composition of different types of enemies causes you to play slightly differently, and then, like I said before, each character plays really differently. So sometimes everything will just go right and you'll be dancing around enemies, doing a bunch of damage, everything will be sort of synergizing perfectly with your teammates, and then other times you'll think, oh, this is going really well, and suddenly there'll be like a wall, there'll be a group of enemies that all do a ton of damage and trap you in place, and you just won't have any idea how to deal with it. You'll die, but then next time you come back in, you'll have a better idea of like, okay, I want to build my character around being able to deal with that problem, being able to deal with that threat. And that's super interesting. So far in the early access version at least, and bear in mind, you know, there's going to be a bunch more characters, there's going to be a bunch more abilities, it doesn't seem like there's that much to sort of upgrade or unlock between games. So every time you level up a character, then it unlocks more power-ups, more items that can potentially drop for you in future games, but that's about it. You're not buffing the stats in the same way that you are in something like Hades. You know, you're not going out and spending gold that you've collected. Instead, any upgrades that you want to get like that, you have to do each game. So as you're fighting enemies, as you're going around the environment, you'll find some of these crystals. You can break those, collect as many as you can, and then you can choose to spend them on items, or you can choose to spend them on sort of stat power-ups and things like that, wherever it is that you spawn. Another thing that massively helps with this and makes sort of going around and buying stuff a lot easier, given that you're on a time limit all the time, is that all over the map there's teleporters. So at any point you can go back to an area that you've already explored just by stepping into the teleporter and heading back. You can always head back to the beginning because then you can spend all of your stat increases and things like that. And a lot of the time when we were playing, our decisions were often about like, okay, we've got like a minute left or we've got 30 seconds left. Do we have time to go get that health upgrade, or do we have time to go back and buy a couple of stat power-ups and things like that? It was super cool and not something I've really seen in a game like this before. You can see for yourself in the video that I've got here in the gameplay, but the game looks super cool. It's got a really nice sort of like painterly art style. The music is awesome. I really enjoyed that. All of that side of stuff is really solid. And for the first days of an early access game, it feels very polished to play. We did have a number of bugs where at the end of games we would just completely crash out. And one of my friends did crash out in the middle of the game. But hopefully that sort of stuff will get ironed out as early access goes on. So if you want to check out Ravenswatch for yourself, it's going to be on Steam Early Access from Thursday the 6th of April, so that's tomorrow when I'm recording this video. And honestly, I think it's well worth a look. If you're into these kind of roguelites, if you've got a group of friends who like this kind of thing and you'd like to do some adventures together, this is an awesome game. Can heartily recommend it.